Answer me this before we go anywhere else. If Democrats need to flip only 3 seats to take back the House majority, why does almost nobody outside the political nerd corner of the internet knows that number? 3 seats, not 13, not 13, just 3. That is how close the House majority actually is heading into this November. And by the time I'm done walking you through this map, you are going to understand exactly why both parties are treating this like the fight of the decade, because it genuinely is. Stick with me because the ending of this video is not a neat little bow. It is an open question that even the people who've built these models for a living cannot answer yet. Here is where we stand. Republicans hold the House majority right now, but it is majorly thin enough that a bad Tuesday in a handful of suburban districts erases it entirely. Democrats have come agonizingly close in 2 straight cycles without closing the deal. And this time, the model has correctly called more House races than almost anyone not named 538, currently puts Democratic odds of retaking the majority somewhere in the low 70%. This is not a coin flip. This is a real advantage, but real advantages get squandered in midterm all the time. And I want to show you exactly where that pressure point stands. Start with the fundraising data because this cycle tells an unusually clean story. New Federal Election Commission findings covered individual donor contributions, the kind of money that signals grassroots enthusiasm rather than self-funding or outside PAC dollars, show Democrats with a meaningful edge across dozens of most competitive districts in the country. That is not a small thing. Individual donor fundraising has historically been one of the most reliable predictors of which party voters are actually fired up enough to show up. When the number tilts blue this early and this broadly, it usually means something real is happening beneath the surface, not just noise. Another factor making the election unusually competitive is the growing number of districts where voters no longer consistently support one party. Across suburban communities in states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, Virginia, California, demographic changes have transformed once reliable Republican districts into genuine battlegrounds. Younger families, higher levels of college education, changing house patterns and population growth has gradually altered the political landscape. At the same time, many rural districts that once elected Democrats have continued shifting towards Republicans over the past decades. These opposing trends mean that both parties are fighting over a relatively small number of districts where the outcome could be decided only by a few thousand votes. Instead of relying solely on national polling, campaigns are increasingly focused on local issues, candidate quality and turnout operations because those factors can determine the winner in races where the margins are razor thin. Now to the districts actually moving on the rating sheets, because a handful of them tell you where the fight is concentrated. A California seat drifted from likely Democratic all the way to lean Democratic, tightening in the party's favor. An Iowa seat slid from lean Republican to a genuine tilt race. 2 seats, one in Indiana and one in Michigan, moved from lean to likely Democratic, which is analysts' language for this one is basically decided, stop worrying about it. Meanwhile, a pair of seats in North Carolina and Texas moved the other direction from likely to lean Republican, tightening in the GOP's favor. And 2 Ohio seats moving in opposite directions entirely within the same states, which tells you just how granular and district-specific this fight is. This is not a national wave sweeping uniformly across the map. This is trenching warfare, district by district, sometimes country by country. Another factor making this election unusually competitive is the growing number of districts where voters no longer consistently support one party. Across suburban communities in states such as Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, Virginia, California, demographic changes have transformed once reliable Republican districts into genuine battlegrounds. Younger families, higher levels of college education, changing housing patterns, and population growth have gradually altered the political landscape. At the same time, several rural districts that once elected Democrats have continued shifting towards Republicans over the past decades. These opposing trends mean that both parties are fighting over a relatively small number of districts where the outcome could be decided by only a few thousand votes. So relying solely on national polling, campaigns are increasingly focused on local issues, candidate quality, turnout operations, because these factors can determine the winner in races where the margins are razor thin. Now let's talk about the retirement wave, because 58 members of the Congress have already announced that they are not running again this cycle, 36 Republicans and 22 Democrats, and that lopsided split tells its own story. When more than a third of the members walking away from the party currently in majority, that is usually a signal that people closest to the actual data inside these campaigns do not love their own odds. Open seats are always harder to defend than incumbent seats. Open seats are always harder to defend than incumbent seats. And Republicans are defending a lot more of them this time than Democrats are. Now let's get specific about where the actual battlefield sits, because competitive districts is a vague phrase until you can point at the map. Independent trackers have identified around 42 districts as genuine battlegrounds this cycle, roughly 12% of the entire chamber. Democrats currently hold 22 of those battleground seats, Republicans hold 20. That near even split inside the battleground itself is exactly why this race is so hard to call with confidence. It is not a 42 Republican seat under siege, it is a genuine two-way fight. Pennsylvania deserves its own moment, because this is one of those states where the fight is most concentrated. 4 Republican-held districts in that state are rated highly competitive this cycle, and 3 of them were decided by 2 points or less back in 2024. Where 3 seats in a single state are sitting on a razor edge like that, Pennsylvania alone could functionally decide whether Democrats clear 3-seat threshold or fall just short of it. New York is quietly one of the more interesting states to watch too, and not just because of the marquee district everyone already knows about. 2 sitting Democratic incumbents actually lost their own primaries this cycle to more progressive and more locally aligned challengers, one of them to a well-known city council figure who unseated a multi-term incumbent outright. Primary upsets like that almost always create at least short-term vulnerability in the general election, because the new nominee has to introduce themselves to a broader electorate in a matter of months instead of years. Now, Texas is where the redistricting story gets genuinely complicated, because it cuts in more than one direction at once. 2 sitting Republican incumbents actually lost their own primaries this cycle after the state's mid-decade map redraw threw multiple incumbents into the same new district, forcing them to run against each other instead of against a general election opponent. The kind of incumbent versus incumbent primary chaos is a direct byproduct of the new lines, and it means some of the seats Republicans drew from themselves came with real short-term political costs before a single general election vote gets cast. And Texas is not the only state playing this game anymore, which is the part I think most national coverage still undersells. California responded to Texas with mid-decade redraw of its own, a new map specifically designed to eliminate 5 Republican-held districts, and voters in the state approved it. There is an explicit, publicly acknowledged tit-for-tat between 2 of the largest states in the country, each redrawing its own line specifically to offset what the other side did. Missouri and North Carolina also entered this race with new maps from voluntary mid-decade redistricting, and Ohio and Utah are using new maps as well. Ohio because of the state law requirement, in Utah because the court ordered it after a gerrymandering, and Utah because the court ordered it after a gerrymandering challenge succeeded. Add all that up, and here's the uncomfortable truth about this election that neither party wants to say out loud. A meaningful number of House seats in play this November are not being decided primarily by campaigns or candidates at all. They are being decided by which state legislature moved fastest and most aggressively to redraw its own lines before the filing deadline, and by which state courts did or did not step in to stop it. Texas moved first, California answered, Missouri and North Carolina joined in on the Republican side. This is now a genuine multi-state redistricting arms race played out in real time, and it is happening almost entirely outside the traditional campaign coverage most voters actually see. Now here's the number that I think crystallizes the whole picture better than almost anything else in the race. There are 14 Democratic-held House districts up this year that Donald Trump carried in 2024 presidential election, and there are 9 Republican-held districts up this year that Kamala Harris carried. Those 23 districts are the most honest battlefields in the entire country, and because they are by definition seats where the voters already showed a willingness to split their tickets. Whichever party does a better job holding its own crossover seats while poaching the other sides is going to win this majority. Everything else on the map is just noise around the core group. I also want to flag the official target list both parties have already published, because they tell you exactly where each side is choosing to spend its own money, which is often a more honest signal than public polling. The Democratic campaign arms have already named the specific Republican-held seats it considers most vulnerable and is funneling resources accordingly, while also running a formal program to protect its own most exposed incumbents in districts it currently holds. The Republican campaign's arm published its own list of more than 24 Democratic-held targets early in the cycle. When both parties are being this explicit and this public about exactly what seats they think are gettable, it usually means that the private polling behind those seats is more reliable than whatever is showing up in public surveys, because campaigns do not spend real money chasing seats that their own internal data says are out of reach. Now, let me also address the fundraising gap in more concrete terms, because a meaningful edge is doing a lot of work in a sentence unless I show you what is behind it. The individual donor fundraising advantage I mentioned earlier is not evenly distributed. It is concentrated most heavily in the suburban battleground seats in states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Virginia, exactly the kind of well-educated, moderate-leaning districts that have been drifting away from Republicans since the first Trump term. It is considerably thinner in the newly redrawn southern seats, where Republicans' favored map mean Democratic challengers are often introducing themselves to an electorate for the very first time with limited built-in name recognition. Now, I want to be completely honest about the scenario where I am wrong in the other direction too, the one where Republicans actually hold the majority against everything I just laid out. If the national economic conversation between now and November tilts hard toward inflation and affordability in a way that specifically punishes the party out of power in the White House, and if the newly redrawn southern seats perform even better, for Republicans rather than current ratings suggest, Republicans could plausibly hold on with a bare 1 or 2 seat majority. That is a real life scenario, not just a hedge that I'm including to cover myself. That is a real life scenario, not just a head that I'm including to cover myself. Midterms punish the party in power more often than not, and the sitting president's approval rating heading into the fall is going to matter enormously for how many of these toss-up districts actually break blue. There is also a genuine wildcard sitting in how many of these races get called on election night itself. With this many districts within a point or two, and with several states now processing mail ballots under new rules following this year's Supreme Court decision on late arrival ballots, do not expect a clean same-night answer on House control. In a close year like this one, some of the most consequential districts in the country will not be resolved until days, possibly more than a week after polls close, and whichever party is ahead on election night should not assume that the lead is safe until the actual count is finished. There's one more structural piece worth naming plainly, because Republicans currently hold a 220 to 215 majority. They can only afford to lose 2 seats net and keep control, while Democrats need a net gain of exactly 3. That asymmetry is the whole ballgame in miniature. It means Republicans are playing defense in almost every sense of the word this cycle, protecting a cushion so thin that a handful of bad news cycles in October could be the difference between keeping the gavel and losing it. Now, I also think it is worth saying clearly that this cycle is generally unusual in how many states are actively relitigating their own map mid-decade rather than waiting for the next census. This is not normal. It used to be that once a state drew its lines after census, those lines held for a full decade barring a successful court challenge. This cycle, multiple states on both sides decided the political stakes were high enough to redraw voluntarily in the middle of the decade, daring the courts to stop them. Whether that becomes the new normal for future cycles or whether it gets reined in future rulings is a much bigger story than just this November. And I think it deserves much more attention than it is currently getting. Now let's talk about the generic ballot, because it is the single number that underpins almost everything else in this video. Averages across the major pollsters currently have Democrats ahead by somewhere between 6 and 7 points nationally, a lead that has held remarkably steady since the spring rather than spiking and crashing the way these numbers sometimes do. Some show it as tight as 2 or 3 points, others put it closer to 10 or 11, but the center of gravity across all of them sits solidly in Democrats' favor, and it has now for months. History suggests that when one party builds and maintains a clear lead on the generic congressional ballot throughout the summer, that advantage often translates into House gains in November. During the Republican wave of 1994, the GOP enjoyed a consistent national polling advantage before capturing more than 50 House seats. Democrats experienced a similar environment in 2006 when dissatisfaction with the Bush administration helped them reclaim the House, and again in 2018 when suburban districts shifted sharply against Republicans. However, recent elections have also demonstrated that polling averages can overestimate or underestimate support in key districts. That is why experienced analysts rarely rely on a single metric. Instead, they combine polling with fundraising, district demographics, voter registration, historical voting patterns, and candidate quality before making projections. So why do 6 or 7 points matter so much? Because there's a well-established historical relationship between the generic ballot and actual seat outcome in midterm years. A party leading by 5 points or more on this measure has typically gone on to net somewhere in the range of 20 to 40 House seats once the votes are counting. Democrats only need 3. Even discounting heavily from the new, more Republican-favorable maps in places like Texas and Missouri, a lead this size and this durable should be enough to clear that bar comfortably, barring a genuine late shift in the national mood. The other thing doing a lot of work underneath the generic ballot is the president's own approval rating, because midterms have historically been a referendum on whoever sits in the White House almost as much as the choice between two parties. Trump's approval currently sits somewhere in the high 30s to low 40s depending on the poll, with disapproval running well above 50% in most surveys. Historically, presidents polling below 45% approval at this stage of the midterm cycle have gone on to lose an average of somewhere around 3 dozen House seats. That is a brutal historical baseline for a party in power, and it is the single biggest reason I'm comfortable predicting Democrats' control rather than hedging towards a Republican-held chamber. But I do want to flag that this lead has not been perfectly stable, because a couple of individual surveys this summer showed it compressing to as little as 2 points before rebounding. That kind of noise is normal in any polling average, but it is worth watching, because if that compression turns out to be the start of a genuine trend rather than a blip, many seat predictions get meaningfully less comfortable, and Republicans' odds of clinging to a bare 1 or 2 seat majority go up correspondingly. Now let me give you one more specific district that I think functions as a genuine bellwether for the entire national environment, because it already told us something important in 2024. And Iowa seat was decided by 0.2 of 1 percentage point in the last election, even as Trump carried the same turf by more than 8 points at the presidential level. That gap between presidential performance and House performance tells you that this is a seat where local dynamics and candidate quality matter enormously, and the same two candidates from 2024 are facing off against in a rematch this year. Whichever way this specific seat breaks is going to tell you a lot about whether the national environment is actually translating down the way the generic ballot suggests it should. New York's open seat to replace a retiring longtime Manhattan Democrat is shaping up to be one of the more genuinely unpredictable primaries anywhere in the country. Not because the general election is competitive, it is not, because the primary field itself is unusually crowded and unusually hard to call. Multiple state legislators and well-known political commentators connect to a famous political family, even if former Republicans, are all bunched within a single digit of each other in early polling. Whoever emerges is going to walk straight into a safe seat. But the primary itself is a genuine test of which lane, progressive, establishment, or something else entirely, has the most energy behind it in a deep blue district right now. Michigan Senate primary I already flagged in the earlier video, but it is worth connecting back to the House picture too, because it is a live test of some progressive versus establishment tension playing out in the House primaries across the country this cycle. Because it is a live test of some progressive versus establishment tension playing out in House primaries across the country this cycle. The most progressive candidates in that three-way primary currently lead the field, ahead of the most establishment-aligned sitting House member, with a third candidate trailing well behind both. Whichever lane wins that primary is a genuine signal about which version of the Democratic Party is actually turning out its own voters heading into the fall, and that has real implications for turnout patterns in competitive House districts nearby. Now, I also want to be straightforward about a genuine warning sign buried in some of this data for Democrats, because it will be dishonest to only present the numbers that support my prediction. Some analysis of voter registration trends have shown Democrats actually losing registered voters in more than 24 key House battlegrounds districts over the past year, while Republicans gaining ground in the same places. Registration trends are not the same as voting share. People can be registered one way and vote another, but a shift like this is exactly the kind of quiet structural data point that could make the eventual results closer than the generic polling alone would suggest. Healthcare has emerged as the specific policy flashpoint that pollsters are flagging as unusually toxic for Republicans this cycle, more than immigration, more than any other single issue tested. Proposed cuts from Medicaid are pooling deeply underwater nationally, and that issue is landing hardest in exactly the kind of competitive suburban and rural swing districts that are are going to decide this majority. If Democrats manage to keep this election a referendum on healthcare and affordability, rather than Republicans successfully making it about anything else, that plays directly into the generic ballot advantage they already have. Pull all of that together, and here is where I actually land on the odds themselves, separate from the seat map that I'm going to walk you through. I think Democrats are meaningfully more close than not to win the House majority this November, somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 75% chance by my own read of all this data stacked together, which lines up closely to where the major forecasting models already have it. This is not a clock. That is a real live favorite with a real life chance of losing anything. And I think anyone telling you this is already decided in either direction is being dishonest with you about how midterms actually work. So here's my call on the shape of this. I think Democrats net somewhere between 8 to 12 seats when the dust settles, comfortably clearing the 3 that they need and giving themselves a small cushion against the inevitable surprise loss or 2 on election night. The suburban districts that have been drifting away from Republicans since the first Trump term kept drifting. The redistricting fights in states like Texas and Alabama, where new maps drawn after a favorable Supreme Court ruling on the Voting Rights Act handed Republicans extra advantage on several southern districts, partially offset that Democratic momentum but do not erase it. My prediction: Democrats retake the House majority, but not by the blowout some more excited predictions account on social media are calling for. This is a real win, not a landslide. Now, I want to spend a minute on why the redistricting fight matters so much this cycle specifically, because it is a quiet story sitting underneath everything else. A major Supreme Court ruling earlier this year made it substantially harder to challenge congressional maps as racially discriminatory under the Voting Rights Act, and Alabama moved almost immediately to redraw its map in a way that eliminates major black districts and is expected to hand Republicans an additional seat. That is one seat manufactured by the courts before a single vote is cast in November. Now multiply that kind of mid-decade map redrawing across a handful of states, and you start to understand why some analysts think the true baseline Democratic advantage nationally is actually larger than the seat math currently suggests. Because part of what Democrats are fighting is not just candidates and turnouts, it is the maps themselves. There's also a second core decision hanging over every one of those districts that almost no one outside political junkies is talking about enough. The Supreme Court struck down the old caps on coordinated spending between national party committees and individual candidates. That means that in closest 30 or so House races, expect a genuine flood of party money in October that simply was not legally possible in prior cycles. Whichever party decides a given district is worth saving can now pour resources into it directly and legally in ways that used to require workaround. I expect this to disproportionately help the party defending seats it is at risk of losing, because incumbency plus a fresh injection of legal coordinated cash is a powerful combination heading into the final stretch. So here is my final call. Democrats retake the House majority in the range of 220 to 224 seats, a workable but not overwhelming majority. The path runs through suburban seats in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and California that have been trending away from Republicans for a decade, offset by Republican gains in newly redrawn southern districts that owe more to a courtroom than a campaign trail. If Democrats outperform this generic ballot advantage in even a handful of the closer suburban seats, this could tip into a much larger majority. If Republicans successfully nationalize this election around the economy the way some of their strategists are hoping, this state's a nail-biter all the way to the final court race, possibly not resolved for days after polls close, given how many of these districts are within a point or two. Now, I'm not going to pretend that this one is settled, because it is not. The redistricting fights are still working through the courts in more than one state. The fundraising gap could close or widen depending on what happens in Washington between now and November, and the coordinated spending ruling is genuinely untested in a live election cycle. What I can tell you with the House majority this year runs through maybe 24 districts most Americans have never heard of. And if you want to actually understand what happens in this country for the next 2 years, those 24 districts matter more than almost anything else in the ballot. If there's one district in this fight that you think I am underrating, put it in the comments, because I'm building a full district by district follow-up and I want your nominations. Share this with the person in your life who thinks the midterms do not matter, because 3 seats deciding control of the entire House is about to be as close as the system gets. I will be back before the August primaries wrap up with an updated read on the map, because if this cycle has taught me anything, it is that nothing here is going to hold for long. I'll see you in the next one.